I want to share some scripture with you this morning. Scriptures from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. Again, it'll be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who'd received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who'd received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who'd received the 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. The man with the 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. Then the man who'd received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you had not sown and gathering where you had not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and I hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus once told a story about a landowner who was preparing for a long journey. He called his 3 servants and divided his money between them, each according to their ability. To one servant, as you just heard, he got 5 talents, another 2, and to a third one, just 1. Why is life like that? I don't know. I mean, we're all equal in the eyes of God. We're all guaranteed the same rights under the Constitution. In an election, our vote counts the same as anybody else. But when it comes to our abilities, we're as different can be. God simply didn't make all of us the same. There are some people who can handle 5 talents, and there are some who can handle only 1. There are some persons who have great intellectual capacities, and some who do not. There are some who have the ability to project and articulate their thoughts, and there are some who struggle with that. There are some who have physical prowess and attractiveness, and there are some who do not. And the important thing to remember is that each servant was given something. No one was left idle. So you may not be a 5-talent person, but you've got some talent. We all do. And you know something? I believe that there are a whole lot more 1- and 2-talent people in this world than there are those 5-talent people. I mean, there are some, certainly. Some who seem to have it all. I can't deny that. But most of us are just 1- and 2-talent servants. So the landowner now goes on this journey. And when he returned, he called together these 3 servants and he asked them to give an account. And it seems that the 5-talent man had invested his and was able to return an additional 5. 100% return on his investment. So the 2-talent man also doubled his money. Well done, good and faithful servant. But what about the 1-talent man? He stepped forward and said, Sir, I know you to be a hard man, reaping where you don't sow. So he returned that which had originally been given. And the landowner was incensed, angry, used such words as slothful and wicked. Angrily, he took that 1 talent back and gave it to the servant who had 10. Now, I think it's interesting to note that in the 25th chapter of Matthew, There are three parables all told in a row. The parable of the bridesmaid, the parable of the sheep and the goats, and the parable of the talents. And essentially the same phrase is used in each, after a long time. The bridegroom, for instance, comes after a long time. The landowner returns after a long time. Judgment comes after a long time. And perhaps this is Matthew's way of saying to us that our Master may be delayed in His return, but meanwhile, what are you doing with the gifts that God's given you? What are you doing with that with which God has entrusted you? And let me be clear on this one issue. God expects a return. So we better not simply bury that which God has given us and then return it when He comes. And it's obvious that the star, or perhaps maybe the villain of this story, is the one-talent man. And the most obvious question is, why did he choose to do nothing with the one talent he'd been given? We're not really given the answer, per se. We're left to speculate about why he didn't do anything. And that's precisely what I'd like to do this morning, speculate on the reasons why he chose to do nothing. First, perhaps he did nothing with the one talent because he feared failure. How did he word it? He said, I was afraid. I hid my talent, fearful of doing the wrong things, so he chose to do nothing at all. This is perhaps the kind of person who might do well under supervision, but now he's left on his own, making his own choices, and he's terrified. We view this man with contempt because he hid his talent in the ground, but perhaps our contempt is misguided. This was considered the traditional way of saving money in that day and time. Maybe he was just being a good conservative businessman. He wasn't going to risk someone else's money by buying into some speculative venture. You know, it seems like the older we get, the more conservative we get. Someone once said that if you're not liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart. But they said if you're not conservative when you're old, you don't have a head. And perhaps this was an older gentleman. And the tendency is they want to play it safe, not go out on a limb. He wanted to play it safe. What's wrong with that? Well, simply this, if you cannot love, you can't love if you're not willing to risk. What's the risk of love? Well, that it won't be reciprocated, that people won't return that love. But as the people of God, we're called upon to be the people of daring. Friends, if Jesus had played it safe, we wouldn't be sitting here this morning. Now, I want to be faithful to this text. So I'd say to you, go and take risks. Take risks and don't so much fear failure. Perhaps a second reason why this one-talent man did nothing with his talent is that he played that game, the if-only game. If only I'd been given the talents of these other two men, then I could have accomplished something more. You know, we play that game sometimes too. I'd love to teach a Sunday school class if only I had her ability. If only I had his voice, I would gladly sing in the choir. I would support the church if only I had a little more money. I would fully support the mission and the ministry of this congregation, but if only I didn't ache and hurt so much. It's a dangerous game because it too easily gets us off the hook. You know, I love the story of a 38-year-old hotel maid who would often go to the movies and sigh and say, you know, if only I had her looks. She'd listen to a singer and complain, if only I had her voice. And then one day somebody gave her a copy of this book called The Magic of Believing. She stopped comparing herself with the actresses and the singers. She stopped crying about what she didn't have and started concentrating on what she did have. She took inventory of herself, and she remembered that in high school, she had a reputation of being one of the funniest people around. So she began to turn her liabilities into assets. And when she was at the top of her career, Phyllis Diller made over $1 million a year. Now in the 50s and 60s, that's a lot of money. She wasn't good looking. She had a scratchy voice, but she could make people laugh. And maybe God is saying something like that to some of us. Maybe when we complain that we wish we had more, if only we were like someone other than ourselves, if only. Maybe He says to us, use the gifts that I've given you. Stop crying about what you don't have and start concentrating on what you do have. God gave each of us something. And we could measurably strengthen this church if we simply reactivated some of our inactive members, started using some of our unused gifts, tapped into some of the talent that we've buried into the ground. Simply stirred up what we already have. To me, however, I think that none of these reasons really gets to the heart of the issue. I really think the one talent man did nothing with his talent because he thought to himself, well, my one little talent isn't really going to make much of a difference. And there are a lot of people who feel that way today. I dare to say if you take a poll of why most people don't vote, it's for that reason. My one vote is not going to really change the world or make much of a difference. I beg to differ. Sir Michael Costa was a celebrated conductor of the 19th century, and he's holding a rehearsal. And as this mighty chorus rings out, accompanied by scores of instruments, one little piccolo player, a little pint-sized flute, thinking perhaps his contribution really would not be missed among so much music, he stopped playing. And suddenly the great leader, the conductor, stopped and cried out, "Where's the piccolo?" The sound of that one small instrument was necessary to the harmony, and the master conductor missed it when it dropped out. And the point? To the conductor, there are no small instruments. There are no insignificant contributions. Because sometimes the smallest and seemingly least important are the ones who can make the greatest contributions, even when it doesn't seem that way to the one giving. The conductor knows it right away. And in a church, the players and the instruments are diverse, different sizes and different shapes, different notes, different roles to play. But like the piccolo player in Sir Michael's orchestra, we offer our own sovereignty, decide that our own contribution is not significant. Our contribution couldn't possibly make a difference, and we quit playing. Or we back out altogether. We stop doing that which we've been given to do. But the conductor immediately notices. And from our perspective, our contribution may be small, but from his, it's crucial. I just have to believe that I'm talking to a lot of piccolo players this morning who have dropped out of the orchestra for whatever reason. Maybe it's pain or exhaustion, insecurity, criticism, laziness, misbehavior, whatever the reason, convinced that your contribution doesn't mean a hill of beans in the bigger scheme of things. And some of us have buried our talent into the ground. So for all the piccolos who won't play or at least aren't playing, Jesus has something to say. Use the gifts that God has given you. I don't know when I spend time on a sermon every week if it's going to make a difference in anybody's life at all. But I do know that it's far better for me to try than not to try. I don't know if teachers, if they make the effort to reach out to a troubled student, if it's really going to make a difference in that student's life or not, but I know it's better to try than not to try at all. When a person reaches a church Sunday school class, goes to the trouble of singing in the choir, they show up for rehearsal, they have no guarantee whatsoever that those efforts are going to help make God any more real to anyone else. But I do know that it's far better to try than not to try at all. You know, we're so used to looking at huge, gigantic issues in our world. Things like racism and poverty and world hunger. We're stunned by the enormity of these kinds of issues. We certainly can't solve these problems. What's the use? Anything I can do would be like a drop in the ocean. And since I can't solve the whole issue, sometimes the attitude is, I just won't do anything at all.